Good afternoon. Welcome to you all. And first place, want to thank Marc and Lieve for asking me to animate this Plant B+B. And there is, of course, some logic in it because these programs, they run for 5 years once renewable. So it's best not to ask me for closing the event. I especially thank the university for starting these international technology networks for major society problems, because they now recognize that indeed what I try often to stress, that plants are so crucial for many, many of our world problems. I, of course, thank the VIB because they tolerate that I'm still around more than 20 years after I retired. So for today, I choose as title Green Enlightenment. Enlightenment because I'm firmly convinced that it is the scientific approach that will help us to solve so many problems our societies have at the moment. And green because it's the importance of plants in this discussion. And of course, it didn't escape your attention that green today means also political and ideological engagements, and that engagement by people who are firmly convinced that they use science to base their conclusions. So we will see how this B+B workshop goes. Here is our planet. These are the landscapes we appreciate and we love, and this is what we call the living world. In this talk, I want to express the importance of plants for our planet. Plants are the true pioneers of the terrestrial environment. And if our ecosystems are threatened, we have to see how to save them. How can the knowledge brought by enlightenment bring the science we need to interact with the living world? It's now more than 30 years that plant biotechnology started, when we could show that gene engineering, that is adding genes or removing genes, was possible in plants, that biotechnology took off. But as soon as we used more and more molecular biology, opposition was growing. For us, it was fundamental science that we did, but when the applications started to come, there was a public opposition that we couldn't understand. Later on, we will come back on essentialism, that people think that if you touch a genome, you do something so essential that it surely should not be allowed. Last year, when the techniques of changing genes by the CRISPR-Cas method gave very, very nice results that would be possible to apply, immediately we saw that the opposition didn't stop. People went on. And even worse, they realized that if that is possible, that also mutagenesis that always was used in plant breeding, that it surely is against changing the genome, so that it must be fought against it, that there must be no acceptance for that. Well, earlier this month, the Yuri Gleba and Jonathan Jones published in Nature Plant an article how to transiently express genes, so without changing the genome. We'll see how the public react against that. Enlightenment, we claim that the reasoning and development of scientific inquiry can help us understand the world. But people from the very beginning started to reasoning without realizing what reasoning was. And several thousand years ago, the Greek philosophers really, from the daily life facts, they concluded what reason would be able to do it. And they were firm believers in reason. But of course, there were not enough facts, and people looked to living organisms and non-living organisms in the same way. And enlightenment really came up when the scientific revolution could be accepted. That is, when people started to do experiments out of this enlightenment. But that was only possible for non-living materials. And logically, they immediately decided that these laws of nature as they were discovering, that it would be the same as the laws that should guide our society, that should guide life. So as I said, primitive man had extremely few knowledge of the world, and so this have to see how these Greek philosophers, by just thinking linearly, there is a problem, reason will give us solutions, how they progressed in their world. So we have to see the history of our scientific thinking. And it's interesting that Anthony Gottlieb, who was in the 80s chief editor of The Economist, that he quit and started writing the history of philosophy because he felt how important reasoning is. But his books were called The Dream of Reason and The Dream of Enlightenment because indeed at the moment we don't have enough knowledge to really say that are the solutions. And it's together that as individual researchers and as scientific community we have to progress there. And that's what Baker decided, and that's what will be the essence of the conversations today. Well, problems, if we try to solve them in a linear way, will generate all kinds of new problems. We know that, we learn that, sometimes we are perplexed about that, but that's the basic message, that we have a network of problems that we have to solve. And let's now go back to our plant world. By solving one problem, that adding genes with the agrobacterial method, I point here as a discovery, was a major breakthrough for doing the plant research. But that didn't solve at all the problems of how to use the plants. The gene engineering strategy of adding new genes that then will stay in this plant can indeed be sometimes detrimental. So it's very important to also think about epigenetics, and if breeders select new plants, that they were doing hybrid vigor, and that actually in the economy of agriculture, it's mostly hybrid vigor that is used to bring you and select the new variants that will have an economic value. So it is again this transient expression that I mentioned just before, and it's to society that we have to explain what really the outcome of his work is, but you see immediately that it is extremely complicated to say what we know all of plant genetics. So doing the discovery was crucial. And if you want to know more about it and how it went, we have the book of Julie Hyman, published by Wageningen University Press, who is telling how using nature's shuttle, there's the agrobacterium study, was important. But it's not describing it only to society. It's really show this society what can develop there, what can we have as beneficial for the society. Enlightenment. So scientific reasoning is a way of knowing, we claim. Is it only reasoning? Well, matter and mind is one, but we have to value the knowledge of matter in our mental process of thinking. So what are the observations? The facts. That is the important first step. We start questioning and we do hypothesis, but we could take hours of analyzing how to do the first steps. And then reasoning helps us to think about experiments, and analyzing the outcome will make that we can start trying to explain it. But more than just knowledge is there, it's all the knowledge that we still don't have. When we talk matter and mind, it might be important to really take a distinction between non-living matter and living matter. And we don't have a feeling that it should be, because it's one, matter and mind. And nevertheless, that's the way, maybe didactical, that we can think about progress. Since it's universally accepted that when we work on non-living matter, it helps us, and we have the mathematical axioms to do the further thinking, it helps us to be all looking to the same facts. We are the same observers. And the conclusions we take, we can say that it are establishing laws of nature. Human societies have to survive without this knowledge, and that has to be in our mind at any moment. Non-living material and living matter are physically the same, but we have to study the difference, and we feel the difference very early on. We talked about vita vitalis. But what is vita vitalis? It's the feeling that what is important is staying alive, is the reproduction. And I will try to convince you that as living organisms, we are obligant symbionts, that we have evolved to work in society. So for further thinking, I will try to add more value to emotions and see that they are important parts of reasoning. I would even dare to say that it is protecting us against wrong decision making. What is the importance of realizing what is the living world? The question, what is life, was already asked by Schrödinger, who studied in the 30s how a physicist was looking to life. Paul Nurse wrote a book, What is Life? How do we, who are interested in plants, think about what is life? I think the best is some anecdotal points. When I was in high school, I was fascinated by organic chemistry. So I took chemistry. And when I started in 1951, I saw that there was enzymology, enzymes that catalyze organic reaction. But in my final year undergraduate, when I wanted to do my thesis in biochemistry, professors of organic chemistry said, no, this chemistry that is not really up to the point. You have first to study the biological macromolecules. And then I saw, that's 1954, that in the textbooks they wrote RNA is for plants and microorganisms, and DNA is for the animal. Well, we have all seen what happened afterward very rapidly. We had the molecular biology, now we talk on systems biology, but the question remains, the physiology and all our behavior, the living world, what do we know about it and how we have to work with it? When for our B+B program, we say that it's important to be guided by science, what do we actually mean? So you have physical science, you have the life science, and the social science. And in the physical science, we know what it all means, how we analyze the physical science, but we have to see the history of it. How did we accept this law of natures? I take here as example the Feynman lectures for theoretical physics. If the freshman students ask it to Feynman, but these equations, what does it mean? Feynman said, I also don't know what it means, but see what we can do with it. And that's the whole feeling we have about science, but that's only the physical science. If you go life science, then you have the whole process of life that we just discussed. And then you realize that we will need evolution to understand what is a living organism and why is our behavior today what it is. But social science all the time had to work without knowledge on this physical science or knowledge on life science. And they did very well. The whole society's evolved. It's 300,000 years ago that people already were trading. So we're thinking, we're negotiating. And all this period further evolved and people used rationality in daily life to go on living. And meanwhile, they changed their environment. And they changed for having a better form of living that probably gives very serious problems to the environment. That are the facts. And the most important thing when we say we let us guide by science is we will first place see what are the facts. And when we start talking about life science, we have to think about evolution and see that it is indeed possible for chemists to see when planet was there for only 4.8 billion years ago, that already, after the first billion year, there were already cells, there was already life, there was already compartmentalization of the chemical reactions. These beginning steps are discussed by specialists in thermodynamics, like here Nick Lane from Imperial College London, Jeremy England, who is a rabbi, but he's also a physical chemist. In his every life is on fire. And it's interesting to see what can that learn us, but we have to go on. The only difference between the living world and the non-living world is evolution. And it's the great contribution of Darwin to have phrased that concept. And that concept, he started to evolve it as a botanist. Darwin was a botanist, and he could understand the findings of Mendel better than Mendel could do it himself. For us, it's interesting that out of the plants he could phrase the different steps of evolution that he already noticed, but he was limited in the way science was seen in his period and on the data at his disposition. And also in society, he was a Victorian person. It was the way the society had evolved till then. Today, what does it mean for us? That means that we have to see our culture, our behavior, our psychology, all our social science, our political science, in view of the concepts of evolution. Today we will talk particularly what does evolution mean for plants. What we learned from evolution till now, surely, that life evolved many, many different ways, and that all of them have the same basic principle. We have to assimilate energy, we have to transport nutrients, all the possible exchanges with the environment. We have to see the environment and adapt to the environment. And we learn now how the unicellular organisms, prokaryotic and eukaryotic, were doing. And if we look how the plants were doing that, it's important to look to the time scale. And it's interesting that you see the difference if you take the fossil data that we have, what we know now with genetics, molecular genetics, the time scale that we see for the appearance of the different forms of plants. It's also very important to see that actually, if you measure it in gigatons of carbon, that from all organisms around, plants are extremely important. And if you know it, take the bacteria or the archaea or the viruses, the protists that are around, the fungi, the animals, it's in mass much less important. But that's the signal, and we have to make our living world out of that. And one of the other important points is that starting from the primates till extremely recently, we were rather modest amount of species and specimen of the hominidae. And suddenly we were able, through reason, finding out how to organize ourselves and how to have technology that we could protect ourselves. And with all what evolution planned, suddenly, and I call it a catastrophe, we have this increase of population. The major problem for all our societies was and is population growth, overpopulation. We think we can handle our megacities, but we see in COVID times already on health how difficult it is to find solutions. And we know from the molecular biology what we can expect that will happen further. We know the problems of nutrition, quantitatively, qualitatively. Environmental damage we know. We see that we have depleting the soil for all our constructions, for all our inventions, for all the tools that we have made. But we better stop doing that. And also for the society problems, we really have to think, what is human behavior? And the sociology and our economy that we have made till now, this plant science that should see how to cope. So there is major damage that we are doing by having overpopulation. And looking closer to overpopulation itself, we have to look to the facts. Recently, we could really stabilize in some parts of the world the population. And the growth in Asia is now curbing indeed, but Africa is coming up very strongly. And we have to see how human behavior, human inventions are responsible for this, because it's there where we still have time to handle the world. We have to see how our behavior, our morality, our colonial history is a problem for bringing capacity, that the population there can join all of us to make better societies where we can handle the material needs we have created and the damage we have done till now. This is the most horrible slide I can offer you. Horribile visu. For the plant world, it's in the middle. It's the overpopulation that brings an economic system. And where was the tropical forest? We have the plantations of the palm tree. We have many places where there is intensive agriculture, especially in the United States, because it's the base of their economy. And the result is that in the Gulf of Mexico, with all the fertilizers that are washed out through Mississippi River, we see all the garbage that is around in the world. We see the greenhouse gases effect on the melting of the glaciers and the icebergs. We see mining destruction. We see our big cities, and especially in the developing world, we see here in Mexico cities that are spreading out on enormous distances. In Plant B+B, we have to concentrate and study how intensified agriculture has an impact on our planet, on the biodiversity, on our health, and on our economy. So see what are the drivers, what are our production systems, and our production system, how do they interact with the ecosystem, and what is the real impact for what we call now the destructive approach that we are doing on our planet. We did it, that is the fact, and we have to realize the fact, and we have to use science to solve the fact. And how to do that, that is now the task of B+B. When we see what medical science was doing out of molecular biology, systems biology, then we think plants also should do it. So what is the knowledge? We think that by analyzing the genomes, we can work out systems biology. But we are still so far. Well, how can science really help today, where it is so urgent? Well, it's the way plant breeders were working. Improvement of plants. And I took a symbol, a tree, that everybody would realize that like plants, it's sessile. How did forests occur? What do we know on management of forests? The impact on the environment and also the way of agriculture. There is an enormous knowledge that we have to develop, but at the moment, for society, we have still another way of looking to trees. Society sees the trees as something very important for the environment, but it's an emotional feeling. We didn't insist very much at the moment that people in philosophy in the recent 25 years stressed that emotional thinking is together with rational thinking and that it is one way of us to judge the world. We cannot ask society to see the molecular aspects where we are finding solutions. The way society looks to this tree is like René Magritte was doing. He called it La Condition Humaine. And it's a painting of 1933. In 1933, for those who remember history, it's a terrible world, especially in Europe. It was not only Hitler, but many regimes that thought that with technology alone, a leader, you could solve all the society problems. And suddenly we see that ethics that is present in our way of thinking since the very beginning, that we know humans show organizations in their societies, that this ethics is very, very demanding on our rationality, on our thinking of knowledge, on what is life. Why should society accept rationality as a guiding principle and better knowledge of plant science as a tool? Well, take nature sustainability issue from last year, how they see the future of agriculture. They talk sustainable intensification. Yes, it's rationality. The science of environment is rationality. But there is not only better knowledge on water use, land use, how management of agriculture. There is also, you need the seeds. You need to know what the plants are really doing in this intensive agriculture and what will you grow and what is the variety of plants that are available as crops and are economically acceptable. And there was no further signal. All what was considered was management. For future agriculture, plant genetics will be a key component. We need better seeds. We need novel crops. We have already shown in the last 30 years that plant biotechnology can, by changing the genome, obtain these plants. But this type of science is now boosted by the fact that we have a new tool in transient expression. We start understanding epigenetics and the importance of it. And we will transiently change a component in the development of the plant. And that is, anyway, what agriculture is. We have to grow plants in an ever-changing environment, an unpredictable environment. Then we will surely have better tools for making novel crops that we will need. In a publication some weeks ago, the Nature Plants of February 3rd, Yuri Gleba and Jonathan Jones and co-workers demonstrated that we have a new tool, as I mentioned already in the beginning, that for obtaining new performances in crops, that we can transiently express a phenotype by transiently express new genes. So temporarily adapt crops to the great unknown of environmental conditions. This was done with the same agrobacterium vectors or some viral vectors that were conceived and developed 30 years ago. Nevertheless, only the synergy between plant biotechnology and plant breeding will help us. Plant biotechnology is useless without the plant breeding, and plant breeding is hopeless without the plant biotechnology. Till now, in plant biotechnology, we had to work in greenhouses, in grow chambers, in laboratories, not in field conditions. But a plant is only showing its capacity when it is in the real environmental conditions, the weather and soil conditions, what we call the abiotic and the biotic stresses. At that moment, and in this part of the world, plant breeders know all too well. That's what they always have done. But they didn't have the tools for changing fast enough. For many crops, it takes years and years, 20, 30, 40 years. And we don't talk about forestry to obtain changing conditions, to identify how do the breeding by its best. So now, together, we have to see that we use the skills of both. Plant breeders say that the phenotype is genotype plus environment. And that's why, if you want to test genotypes, that you have to subject them to different environmental conditions. They see that there is a wide range of phenotypes. They call it phenotype plasticity. And that is now that we have to explore together. A field trial is a clinical trial for the medical field. We see how it performs under different environmental conditions. For Plant B+B, that means that we not only have to discover what is the molecular base of all the processes in plants, but that we also have to show to society what we can do. And till now, the plant breeders, they did it by doing selection and inventing intensive agriculture through hybrid vigor. Molecular base of hybrid vigor is fascinating. And that will now be possible to study it much better with the approaches from the transient expression and the concepts of epigenetics. But the economy that we are making now is the economy that society imposed on agriculture at the moment. So we have to discuss with whole communities what is the impact of this agriculture on society, and it is together with the good understanding of what is human life, what is society life, that we can find the impact. Because just describing and explaining what are the chemical reactions or the molecular biology of plant science, we are completely wrong. And if you would have doubt about that, and doubt that science and technology are very important social goods, look to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You have all seen these icons, and of each of the icons, what they say that society should give answers, it's science and rationality that should give answers based on the facts, what is life, how do we organize our societies. And you will see that plant science, that B+B, is nearly in all of the problems identified by the United Nations as extremely urgent. And most of all is working together, all of us, to have a better agriculture for the environment. Science and technology are social goods. And we should wonder why it is not a consensus. But if you see what it is, this science and technology, then you see that society makes possible public research that goes on to industrial research, that makes our economy, makes us market. But the markets in the society block with some principles of market economy this whole cycle. How does it block this whole cycle? Well, through gene engineering, we saw the possibility to make male sterile plants and to make hybrid plants for vegetables. And in that period, there was here in the School of Agriculture a specialist in breeding of Belgian endives, and saw that if we applied this gene engineering technique for making hybrid vigor in these endives, we had 30% more yield. We thought, that's fantastic. No, we can grow that. But immediately the market said, no, we don't give you the license to use this technology because it's just a minor crop and we have to use it for the high value. So that is a little anecdote how society reacts if science is working. So now, with the novel techniques of transient expression, we'll go much further in using hybrid vigor and applying hybrid vigor for many, many different crops, especially the crops Africa needs. We also have very seriously give priority to thinking how do we create value in crops and how do we extract value in crops, how do we destroy a lot of value in our planet. And it's not so easy to think about that. And highly appreciate what Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky were doing on what is thinking. How do we use our brain? And I always suggest that you have a look at Thinking Fast and Slow that Daniel Kahneman wrote, that we have to think about what is system 1, what is system 2, how can we use it in the field we are working in. I also find it is extremely important that we, as molecular scientists and as plant breeders, we have a look how economists sometimes look at our societies. So we have here the book The Value of Everything by Mazzucato. It's see how the government and the private businesses handle what scientists are doing. If till now I insisted so much that we as plant scientists should pay better attention to human sciences, to social and economic decision making, it is because we have to apply our science. We have to acknowledge that society has the right to understand what we claim that there would be a better way to do agriculture. If we think agriculture, we see me, the person who is doing the science. We see our communities, community of the scientists who do it, community of the people who have to apply it. And we think also them, that is the communities we are not very familiar with, the different groups that are around. And we are all linked in one world society. So we have to see what is the cooperation, what is the identity of these three groups, who are the partners, and how we will really help each other. And we have to understand, if people talk us about sacred values, what they mean. We talk about ideologies. Are they necessary, bad, or good? No. You have to see what does it in the decision making we are doing at the moment and what would be a better decision making. And so that's the result that the European Union, in their sociological economical studies, have a group in the Joint Research Commission that really thinks about science and knowledge service. And the strange figure you see here at the right, that's the symbol of a publication of up to 85 pages that they have made in many languages, all the European languages, where they explain that you really should do decision making through rationality, but at each moment be well aware about emotional thinking and emotional decision making. And this becomes particularly important if we think about me and them, because knowledge of human behavior shows us that we all have fear and anxiety for the others that we don't know, for the competition that will come up, what would be negative for us in the new situation. So we have to be ready to understand better the social plasticity of all our societies. And I would dare to say that we have to realize as scientists that we are obligate pansymbionts, and that is the way you have to see to the biology. And that can help at least us, and we have to explain to society that it is the real situation. This means that the social plasticity is created by our social commitment that makes it legitimate to do this type of decisions for ourselves and for the valued others, as Tomasello said. Humans recognize actually in their individuality, interdependence, and all the implications it brings. Together with the Faculty of Philosophy, and they are members of our Plant B+B network, we already 5 years ago published in Plant Science the importance of these ideologies that we have created, because this social interdependence is extremely important for having peace and for having the possibility to do the science and to bring technologies to what the real value of the technology is. And we have to see what spreading of fake news can do as damage. So in this article in Plant Science, we said one point that I stressed in the beginning, this essentialism, that we think we cannot touch genomes, because if we touch genomes, that's the essence of life, and that we have to discuss in the perspective of all what we know of evolution and what is life. And we have also to see what is disgust. It's also deeply embedded in our moral thinking, in our emotional thinking. So it is a fact. We have this disgust. So we have to see that we don't let us guide by fake news that we hear about what is discussed, because it is the specialists in human science who have to tell us, and we do. But most of complications come through the teleological approach. The fact that if we do science, we have knowledge, and on this knowledge comes new knowledge, and on this new knowledge further, and then finally we think, oh, but it's logic. There is a line in it. There is a purpose in it. There is a line we have to follow. So there is somebody who has to tell us how it goes, and we have to identify who is telling us that. That's a very complicated thing. Let's wait for that. Everybody, if we study religion, we see that the religions are so different and all have the same ways of having somebody who guides us and when we have no information. So let's work on having information and later on decide. Already in the periods of Enlightenment, philosophers who studied nature, who studied our societies, they knew that we were very inclined to have fear for knowledge. And that they stated already that the last sentence here, that the good moral attitude is not to surrender to the fear of danger, but to master it by calculating the probability. At the moment, when we talk about society, on one hand, we find it logic, but at the other hand, we say we know better. No, that is one of the aspects of life. And that's Enlightenment helped us to understand life. So summarizing what study of life and how our societies work and what philosophers were bringing, I would say, dare to think, but watch what you think. We learned in science that there is one entity that helps us to discover the basis of what is matter and how we think about this matter. We see that this rational thinking can help to build an economy and an environment that is so much more friendlier than the environment the Homo sapiens evolved in. But doing that efficiently, we know now that we need rationality and statistical thinking. But the culture of daily life, who also works on rationality, says that if we want to understand our behavior, that we have rational thinking, but also emotional thinking. It's very recently that we dare to phrase it in that way. Well, let's see how we can go on and how we can help society understand the science, use the science, not for fighting each other through ideologies, but seeing that the same persons with all their different emotional opinions really can build a better society. Since the facts show us that we are still guided a lot by emotional thinking and that we want to have an advice how to do things, I would only say one good guiding principle for science and our emotional work is, I didn't think about that. If you see in the Renaissance period how Leonardo da Vinci progressed just by logical thinking, making some tools, and at the same time progressing on understanding life with the art contribution he did, and that he realized that what he was doing was a little thing of what others will do later, and that we have seen, that he phrased it in, I have offended God and mankind by doing so little with my life, then yes, we didn't think about that. So, this final slide, green enlightenment is based on the knowledge of matter and mind. And the goal is what is coming, the process of life. The goal is the great unknown. And as tool, we only have, I didn't think about that. So, Ipopeo has to progress in this process, and I'm confident personally that we are obligate symbiotes. I don't know if everybody would agree that we are not Homo homini lupus, but that's the conclusion till now. So the cafe is open. Cheers to everybody, and see you in 5 years' time.